Hello and welcome along to this latest episode of Cali Corner. It's just going to start today's episode with a bit of public service announcement. It's just to say that I've actually set up a Patreon now, patreon.com/Cali Corner. A lot of you will be familiar with Patreon. I'm effectively looking to crowdsource the production costs behind producing the podcast here. So if you can afford it and you enjoy what I'm doing here, then please do consider heading over there. It's been set up at the sort of default value, which is $5, because I didn't know how to change it, to be honest, but that might change in the future. But as I say, if you would be interested in helping with production costs, then please do head over to patreon.com Cali Corner, where you can sign up. I'm also looking to use that as like a vehicle to maybe see who people would be interested in coming on as a guest, and maybe setting the agenda for some of the conversation. And when I've got guests confirmed, I'm happy to sort of say this is who's coming on, and you can suggest and put questions to them as well through that forum. So that's the idea, that's the pitch. If you'd be interested, then please do head along to patreon.com/Cali Corner, as I say. And thanks for all the support so far, I really do appreciate it.
From the big government data sets, we know that if you come from a working class background, even if you get to university, and even if you get a degree, and then even if you get the same degree in the same subject as somebody from a more middle class background, you're likely to do less well in the labour market. Middle class children acquire skills that working class children just don't acquire, just by dint of their background in their community. So we mix up qualifications with skills. So you say, well, what skills have you got? Well, I've got a degree in something. Well, that's not a skill, that's a qualification, that's an accreditation. It doesn't necessarily tell you whether you've got any skills or not. I'm sure lots of employers will tell you that. On average, you will do better financially with a degree than without a degree. The please don't write to me and tell me your brother left school at 14 and is now a millionaire, because that can happen as well.
Hello, Jeanette Findlay, welcome along to Cali Corner. I really appreciate you coming in to do this.
You're very welcome.
Oh, no worries. Jeanette, you're probably well known, like among Celtic fans and the sort of trade union movement and stuff, but you're a professor of economics, as I understand, at Glasgow University as well, so I thought it might be interesting just to talk a bit about what economics is, because I don't really understand it, and I'm sure some of the listeners might not understand it as well.
Yeah, I think it's funny because lots of people don't understand what economics is, you even get asked that. I was saying to you earlier that sometimes, on open days when, final year school pupils come up to universities and they wander in the stalls and all the different disciplines are there to talk to them, and they say, sometimes they'll just come up and say, well, what is economics? And I think you'll get different answers to that, but my view on economics is just quite simply the study of the way in which we both produce and distribute the things that we need to live. So it's really something that should be under our control. So we decide, do we want to have lots of public goods and fewer private goods, so that lots of things are provided publicly, housing, education, transport, whatever? Or do we want to have a very small amount of public goods and lots of people just buying private goods themselves? And there's, lots of arguments. I would be in favour of lots of things being supplied publicly, because that's a more efficient way to do it, and then less sort of private activity. So that's what economics is. It's about deciding how you want to do things. But I get the impression that lots of people think the economy is like, I don't know, it's a big thing and it sits in a room and you just have to do what it tells you. So when you say, well, why can't we work fewer hours? Why do we work second only to the US? Why do we work the longest hours? Why do we do that? If we don't want to do that, why do we do it? Or why do we have, smaller amounts spent on health? And why do we have, all of those kinds of things? And it's almost as though the answer is, we have to. It's the economy. The economy is just such that, and I don't accept that. But as long as you tell people that there's this big monster called the economy that sits in a room somewhere and tells everybody what to do, then people might accept it. But I don't agree with that, because, you can even see with your own eyes that other countries take a different view on how they want to manage their resources and distribute them.
No, I think like from my perspective, I was sort of saying briefly this earlier as well. Like, I think it seems like this big abstract thing that you don't really understand, and it's complicated, and it's almost like a bit boring to some people. So like, oh, we'll just let the adults deal with that, and we'll worry about the other stuff that directly affects you, like stuff that you're talking about, like housing, education. You know, that's maybe stuff that people would be more vocal about and get more involved with. But what got you first interested in economics? Like, was there a light bulb moment where you thought, I really want to learn about this, or this is something I want to go and study?
No, not really, because obviously in Scottish education system, the higher education system, you go in with quite a broad range of things. So you might get into social sciences or the arts or the sciences, engineering. And I originally went and had it in my mind that I might become an accountant. So I did my first degree at Strathclyde. So in Strathclyde, at that time, I don't know what you do now, but you did 5 subjects. So I did accountancy, economics, economic history, statistics and industrial relations, and then you take 2 of those forward. And at that point I had changed my mind. I liked economics and I liked industrial relations, so I took those 2 forward and I did a joint degree. And then I worked for a year as a research assistant at Strathclyde, and at that point I kind of realised that I needed more sort of technical skills, statistical, econometric skills. Had some just from my undergraduate degree, but I wanted more. And I went to Bristol and did a Masters in Quantitative Economics. So I'm an applied microeconomist, which means that I'm a microeconomist because I'm interested in the decisions, the way people make decisions. When I say individuals, I mean individual people, individual companies, individual firms make decisions, and the individual households, and what the outcomes of that are when you add them all together. So that's what I'm interested in. I think those are the interesting things, and it's applied because I study that by the analysis of data. So I'm less interested in theoretical models about why people do what they do, and more interested in what do they actually do and how do we, so I'm very interested in policy, and I don't think there's much point in doing any of this unless you want to change things. And if you want to change things, then you have to know why they happen, you have to know what's happening, and you have to know why they happen, and then that might involve quantitative data, and that's what I've done for the vast majority of my career. More recently, I have going a bit beyond that in terms of qualitative data, in terms of actually asking people or thinking about, what's below those numbers. So actually speaking to people, because economists by and large don't speak to people. So I've come to that quite late, and I'll sort of explain that, because that sounds a bit abstract. So for instance, from the big government data sets, we know that if you come from a working class background, even if you get to university, and even if you get a degree, and then even if you get the same degree in the same subject as somebody from a more middle class background, you're likely to do less well in the labour market. So that's what we know. So we think, well, how did that happen? How is that happening? So some of the work that I do is to say, well, what's the possible reasons it could be? So it could be that somehow, just by being brought up in a middle class household, in a middle class community, you acquire some soft skills which are actually productive and which make you more valuable in the labour market. That could be one reason. And if that's the reason, then we need to find a way of providing those to working class students. Or it could be that just being part of a middle class background and community, you have more contacts and networks. So you find your way towards the most productive opportunities for you, and you find to the best jobs. And if that's the reason, then what we need to do is we need to create those networks in a more mechanical way for working class children, and not just assume that they'll have them. Or it could be discrimination. So the residual is always discrimination. So when you try to measure discrimination in this this applies to, sex discrimination and unequal pay and all of that. You just say, right, let's account for everything that we can account for and see whatever's left, see if there's still something left. That's discrimination. So if it's discrimination, then we need to look at that. We need to either put in socioeconomic status as a protected characteristic, although that hasn't really helped in terms of removing sex discrimination or unequal pay. But, you move there, it's got smaller. Or you engage in some sort of education with businesses and government. You say, you're actually wasting talent. There's talent there and you're wasting it because you have a negative view towards people who speak in a certain way or whose class background is evident. And so that would be a different policy. So say you've got 3 different possible reasons with 3 different policy prescriptions. So if you want to fix it, you need to work out which it is. So that's the kind of thing I do.
No, that's interesting. What does the data tell you then? Like when you're analysing the data, do you have a preference that the reasons for the people from working class backgrounds no doing as well as middle class folk?
Well, no, we're at the very beginning of this, you would think. So economists have spent, and some quantitative sociologists have spent years constantly checking and testing different countries, different data sets, different things to say, is there a class pay gap?
And is this across countries as well, just as you mentioned
that? Yeah, across countries.
This is not just a Scotland
thing. It's not just Scotland, it's not just the UK, across countries there's a class pay gap. So we measure it and measure it and measure, and then we've done it so many times, with so many different data sets over different time periods, we go, yeah, there's definitely a class pay gap. There is definitely something there. You can't prove that. Well, there's no such thing as proof in the social sciences, but you can't have reliable evidence for that if it's just for one study. So we know that that's the case. So then you say, why is that? What is happening there? And the problem, so testing that first one, is that middle class children acquire skills that working class children just don't acquire, and just by down to their background in their community. Then you would have to have really fine-grained skills data. But we don't. What we have is qualifications. So we mix up qualifications with skills. So you say, well, what skills have you got? Well, I've got a degree in something. Well, that's not a skill. That's a qualification. That's an accreditation. It doesn't necessarily tell you whether you've got any skills or not. I'm sure lots of employers will tell you that. You're very well qualified people, but they don't have the sorts of skills that they expect to have. So we need to try and find skills data, and the skills data that we have, and there's big international data sets on skills, but they're very broad. So they're called the Big Five, and don't ask me what the Big Five are, but they're things like, I think, I just can't think at the minute, the name, so, creativity and persistence, and those are not the names of them, but anyway. So,
stuff like that.
So there are the big, broad skills things. So that's a conundrum. You think, well, where are we going to get skills data? And so you could go out and do a really, really big survey where you speak to people and you ask them, you try and think of what all the possible skills could be, and you sort of ask them if they've got them, and you do all that. That would be a very expensive undertaking, and I'm not clear that anybody would fund you to do that. So what we've done is we've got in tow with a company called Skills Miner, which is actually I can't remember how they describe themselves, but they're a sort of careers, like a job site, but no, it's not like Next or Indeed. It's not like that. They sell their platform. It's an AI platform. They sell it to, I think, to local authorities and things like that. And so you're looking for a job, and you go into this. You're allowed access to this platform, and you go in. It just basically, it's an AI generated sort of conversation. Have you done this? What about that? What have you done before? And just like conversations about, have you ever been in a situation like this? Have you ever? So, and then on the basis of the answers you give it basically classifies or lists all the sort of micro skills that you have. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we're now doing is to try and get to do people who are final year undergraduates at Glasgow have been given access to this, And so they did a prior survey which allows us to assign them to a socioeconomic status, just using the standard way that we do that. And then they will do this thing and they can have access to it for a year. So they're looking for work, so it's quite a nice thing for them to be able to have access to that they wouldn't otherwise have it. And what we hope is that will generate data. So all these individuals, obviously we don't know their names and we won't be able to track them because that would be unethical, but we would be able to connect them to their socioeconomic status and we would know what skills they have, and then we'll be able to see whether middle class children have more skills or different kinds of skills or whatever than working class children. And that would allow us to, maybe either rule out or rule in that as a possible explanation.
It'd be interesting as well, because I'm relating this to my own work experience. Like all people, you go through like your end of year reviews effectively. So your employer sort of is telling you how you're comparing against your colleagues. And I've done this whether I've worked in the hospitality industry or in IT and things like that. So if companies would sell that data or give that data away, you could mine that data effectively and sort of say, well, they could maybe give you the salaries and say, right, the people who are on these salaries have these skills and the people on these salaries have these skills, and then you could kind of...
No, look, that data is there somewhere or in lots of different places and in a different variety of formats, but it's not something you can easily access. So this project is a way of trying to, if this works...
Why is that, Jeanette? Sorry. Why do you think it is no easy access? Why are companies holding on to that kind of data?
Well, for the very reason you said. You can't sell people's data. There's laws about that sort of thing. You can't just... If I was going for, a PNDR or whatever assessment that I get an annual review, and my employer was suggesting that they were selling the outcomes of that to anybody, I would be very bloody annoyed about that.
What if they cut you into the profits?
Well... So there is an issue about it. They don't, and that's not what, maybe your employer or my employer's not interested in doing that because that's not their core business. And there's evidence about people's skills and there's around there, but how you bring that all together is more tricky. So if this works in the small scale that we're doing it, or it looks like it might have potential, then we might try and seek funding to do it on a larger scale, and just to be able to just pursue that to its end. And it might be that we find nothing. It might be that we find that there doesn't seem to be much difference, in which case we have found something. It'll be the absence of evidence that it's that reason, and that would be fine. And then we would, you would then have to move on to a different reason. But it would certainly direct policy, wouldn't it? You would be able to say to government, if you want to remove the class pay gap, which I assume somebody in government does, then, because, they should, because it's really inefficient to have people. It's in the same way as having a sex pay gap is inefficient, because you're not directing resources to the most productive outcome. So, as inefficient, so it doesn't help anybody.
Aye, and is this like when people are first getting jobs, or is this like throughout their whole careers?
Well, that's a good question, because...
Well, that's what I'm here for,
Yeah. You're the guy with the skills and the good questions. Well, exactly. I mean, we're looking at it from the point of view of when you set out, because that's who we have access to. That's kind of who we have access to at this point, and that seemed the easiest way to do it. But it's entirely possible that there's no difference in the first instance, and that somehow or another these skills develop in a way that, over time, that you can't see in that. So people can be in the labour market for 5 years or 10 years or 15 or 20 years, and they might change all the time. So, I mean, we're not going to find the answer to this question anytime soon, but if you're not going to spend a long time trying to work out what's going on with such an important thing as that in a university, then I'm not sure where you're going to be doing it, because nobody else is going to be doing it, are they? So I might not get to the end of that question by the end of my career, but I will have hoped to have made some contribution that other people can pick up and run with.
Your sort of research is taking it, is it transport or is it housing? Is it like a combination of government spends?
Well, over time those have changed. So over time you know, if it's got a little bit of microeconomic theory behind it and some numbers, then I'm your woman if I'm interested in it. So I've had the luxury of having a career where I could spend time thinking about it. So a long time ago, I was looking at the steel industry and why we had a problem with steel, why they wanted to shut down the steel industry, which of course they did. I didn't actually end up helping to prevent that, but I was involved in looking at that. Well, we were interested in, because it was very clear that there was some problems with the way it was set up and where it was sited and so on. You know, every steel industry in Europe sits next to a river so that they can move. Transport costs are much lower because you put it on your rivers and you move it. Whereas it was placed in Ravenscraig for basically for regional reasons. You know, they needed to revive a particular part of the country and they put it there, and that obviously caused it a problem. But nevertheless, you know, the skills and the type of steel that was being produced there was like unparalleled throughout the world. You know, it was really good stuff because there's a bit of a black art to making steel. Although I don't know if there's anybody alive now that still knows that, but I remember it.
Did they make the right decision or the wrong decision then there? Like, they close it down?
Well, I think they could have. Well, the problem is, where do you start from? So maybe they shouldn't have put it there in the first place, but they did. But I think, you know, always more could be done because you make a decision. Because steel is also, remember, a strategic good. Yep. So even if you're not the best in the world at making it, you might still want to make it because you don't want to have no access to steel production. So, you know, there's lots of different reasons why you might do that. But we did have a workforce, particularly the DL steelworks, who were among the finest in the world to make steel. So that was something I did back then. I've had a long period where I was interested in housing economics.
Are you still interested in housing economics?
I don't teach housing economics anymore, and I haven't done any work on housing economics for quite a long time. But at the point where I was actually doing this, I bought my first house. So I was spending my day job, you know, talking about, you know, the house, you know, bidding system in Scotland and you know, just different ways of thinking about, you know, how what because of the structural and the institutional and legal framework within which houses are bought and sold, what happens to how that has an impact on prices and how it has an impact on, you know, supply and so on and so forth. So I'm talking about all these things, and I was bidding for my house, and at that point I think the solicitor said, well, I think the one we're looking at was offers over, I think it was offers over 68, and she said, and I says, well, what do we do? And she says, well, I think you need to go at least to, you know, maybe 2-3 grand. And I said, right. So we went for 71,101, and really the only reason for that was 7-1 for the 7-1 game in the 10th of January for my daughter's birthday. So it was literally as random as that, and given that it's a blind bidding system, then, you know, spending much more time thinking about it. But I'm not sure I admitted that to students at the time. But anyway, that's what I did. We did get the house, and it was worth very much more than that now, but although I don't anyway, so there you are. So that's that. So and the other thing that happened when I moved for that house, because I don't own that house anymore, but when I moved for that house, houses were very overpriced, and it was very clear to me that there was going to be a crash. The bubble was going to burst, and, you know, of course that didn't help me, because if you were bidding on a property, if nobody else knew that, they were still bidding high. So, yeah, they might have been left with a house that was overpriced, and they might have found themselves in difficulties, although house prices aren't as volatile in Scotland as they are in England, so you tend not to get an awful lot of negative equity. But they got the house. I didn't, because I said, well, I'm not bidding that high because I know that that's going to come down. So having that knowledge wasn't particularly helpful at that point. I had to end up grabbing a fixed price house that came on the market close to where I wanted to be, and we've been there ever since, so I suppose it wasn't a terrible outcome. But so housing, I've done that.
Well, if you still have this housing knowledge, Jeanette, feel free to share it amongst the troops. So if the bubble's going to crash, you can be the mystic Meg and let us all know. Well,
there's a whole different structural reality now for young people as well. I mean, when I set out into my adult life, it was still, social housing was still the majority tenure. So social housing was the majority tenure. The next chunk was private, owner occupied, and then a very small but 10% private rented. That was the structure. And I was in a council house myself, born and brought up in one, lived in one till I was in my late 30s, and had no issue or interest whatsoever with buying a house. It just wasn't a thing when I was growing up. Well, certainly no among working class people. You didn't really think much about it. But my sister was saying, because she was in a council house actually opposite, we ended up my mum was in the middle flat, that's where we were brought up. I ended up getting the flat above, and then my sister got the flat below, so we were the three years, we're up the same close. But anyway, at that point, she says to me, Jeanette, we're paying 2 full rents here for 2 2-bedroom flats. Why don't we just buy somewhere together? I don't want to buy anywhere. I'm not interested in that. Whereas now I think people think that's the norm, that's what you should do, that's what you should reasonably expect to do. And that is actually, that came from Thatcher. You are all Thatcher's children. Really.
You're getting offensive now, Jeanette.
No, seriously, she was the most successful in changing very long-standing cultural and economic norms and realities and thinking. You know,
but it goes wider than that, no, because sorry to cut you off, but it's because they don't build social housing anymore.
Well, no, yes, and she managed to do it. No, I'm no suggestion you're all daft, but right for the out, even before we were in the current crisis, I think the notion that you would just spend your whole life in a social rented housing wasn't the case. It wasn't the same as strong as it was when and then of course it was council house sales, so that put paid to that, and there was well, obviously in Glasgow you had transfer to still to social rented, but you had that stock transfer. So all of those big structural changes mean that young people now are really left with very little in the way of, they either pay hugely inflated private rents for pretty substandard accommodation, because the vast majority of the average landlord in Scotland has, I think, I can't remember the last time I looked, it was like 3 or 4 properties, as opposed to like in Germany and France and parts of the United States, where you have really big institutional investors in private housing, so they properly run these things, and they have, it's like very well run, as opposed to you phone up your landlord and he might come round with a spanner and fix whatever. These are proper institutions that you're dealing with, and everything's kept, everything's done properly. So you have that choice of having that very, very overpriced, and then you're unable to get out of that because you don't qualify for the small amount of social rented housing that's still left, unless you're, unless you've children and whatever. And then you can't get a mortgage because for some reason, even though you're paying, I don't know, whatever it is, you're paying some X amount in rent, they just assume that's not affordable for a mortgage, so you don't get the mortgage, even though you might be paying less. I actually ended up paying less in a mortgage than I was paying in my council house rent, because I was sharing with my sister. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But so you're in a completely different. But what I meant by Thatcher's children, and I get that, and I quite like saying that. I quite like saying that to anybody younger than me, because it just shocks them. Is that she really, really successfully managed to mess with people's heads. She didn't just completely restructure the British economy. She actually restructured the way people think about things. So, there is no society. And like when I was growing up, as soon as you worked, you joined the trade union. You just joined the trade union. That's what you did. You just did. And there was still closed shops, so you had to join the trade union if you went into certain places, and that was just what you did. You didn't think about it. And now that is just so not the case. Lots and lots of young people doesn't even cross their mind why they should. And that's quite funny for me, because sometimes, and of course I'm dealing with, in universities, I'm dealing with people coming in from all different countries, and so they're coming from all different backgrounds, and they'll say, what I said, you're going to join the union, and they go, why should I join the union? And I used to be really flummoxed with that. I used to think, because you should. You know, like, I couldn't think you putting it into words because it's just so innate to you that you join the union. And of course I can now articulate that better in terms of why you should join the union. But so she changed that. She changed the notion about, you know, about property, about having property. She changed the notion of sort of, I don't know, society, public spaces. Now I think that I'm obviously caricaturing a bit because lots of young people do lots of things, you know, so the Live and Rank campaign's a great campaign about these kinds of things, and so I'm caricaturing it a bit, but she was enormously successful in changing the way that people think about very long held established just norms, the way people lived and stuff like that. So she was very, very successful in doing that, and you know, damn her to hell, but she did. And I don't say that with any degree of admiration. I'm simply pointing out that that's what happened. So I think that's really problematic. So I think young people, and again, I'm no disrespecting young people because I'm talking about people right up to, you know, just maybe about 5-10 years younger than me. They've changed those things. So anyway, housing, did that. Sport, did stuff on the economics of team sport, although they wouldn't let me call it the economics of football, although as far as I'm concerned that is the only sport, so I don't know I don't know why they made me say. So I used to say to the classes when they started, I used to say, oh well, you know, this is called the economics of team sport, I'll only be talking about football, feel free to think about whatever it is you're thinking about, but you know, just as long as it's a team sport, that's all we need to think about. And so talking about the structure of that, talking about competition, talking about, you know, those kinds of competitive balance, those kinds of economics type discussions about sport. But more recently, and I suppose as I move towards what is undoubtedly going to get into near the end of my career, I think about education. I think about education, skills, labour markets, class pay gaps. Those are the things I'm really interested in and have spent some time writing and thinking about. But the other thing that I still do, I've been involved in discussions of Lifeline ferry transport in Scotland for nearly 20 years. From time to time there's yet another thing that's happening, and I come back in and I do some work, usually in cooperation or for the trade unions. And more recently, I have done a piece of work with a colleague for the Celtic Trust, who's also an academic, looking at corporate governance and thinking about, and we did a survey asking people about, you know, how Celtic runs itself and whether there should be a shadow board. I don't know if you've come across that, I can talk to you about that if you want, but whether we should have a shadow board at Celtic, and, you know, which is a sort of gold standard corporate governance way of doing things. So I've just finished analysing that data for that survey, and that actually should be up on the university website very, very soon. Like, I don't know, it might even be up this week, I don't know. And I wasn't in last week, you know, it might be up, but that's done, that's finished. So yeah, I still have some various things that I just pick up because I like, but mainly I would say it's coalesced into education, skills, labour markets. That's where I am.
So what does that mean, like, in terms of the educational skills? Is that you directing what the curriculum is at the university, or is it more wider than that?
No. I'm thinking about education. So mainly I'm thinking about higher education. I'm thinking about what happens to working class people, why they're less likely to go into higher education, what are the reasons that prevent them, particularly in Scotland where they don't have tuition fees. There's huge, I think, myth around that. Everybody thinks because there are no tuition fees in Scotland that, you know, there's absolutely nothing stopping working class people from going to university, but actually there is, because maintenance costs there's still a clear financial constraint around spending 4 years no earning, or and having to maintain yourself. You know, you've not got anybody else to maintain you if you don't come from the sort of background where somebody's going to do that, regardless of the fact that you don't pay tuition fees. And then you think, well, they could get student loans, and they were once in a sort of preferential rate. I'm not sure they're quite so much that now. But even that you then have to contend with working class attitudes towards debt, which is different. So middle class people don't have any problem whatsoever with acquiring debt as long as it's sustainable, whereas working class people are terrified of debt, and just don't want to be getting into starting out their working life with a huge amount of debt. And who can blame them? So there's financial constraints about that. So there's lots of reasons why we still don't see the same numbers, proportions of working class people going to university than we do middle class people. And that's a huge problem, a huge waste of resources in society. So I'm interested in that.
I'm interested in that as well because that's my background, Jeanette. So what is like the antidote to that? Like what should the Scottish, what are you trying to influence them to do effectively? Should they be providing larger bursaries to people who are from a more deprived socioeconomic background? Like what kind of stuff could they be doing to counteract that?
Well, there's obvious things. I mean, when I went to university, I had a grant. And I had, I didn't pay fees and I had a grant. So I didn't live the high life. I did actually give my mad dig money, unlike middle class Waynes who.
So did I.
I still gave my mad dig money out of my grant because that's what you do. And for those of you who don't remember dig money, it is what you should be paying your parents if you're living with them. I have a very strong view on that. I don't know when dig money fell out of fashion, but
I'll tell you a funny story. But I don't know if it's funny. But when I was in the house, my sister was also in the house and she was a student and I was paying £50 a month dig money and she was paying fuck all, so I don't know how you square that one. But
right, no, well, I don't know how you need to go back and talk to your man and dad about that, but no, I have a very strong view, regardless of whether you need it or don't need it. People, once they reach a certain stage, have to contribute to the household they live in, and I think you're teaching them the right thing. And all the ones that go, oh well, I took their dig money every week and then when they left the house I gave them it all back, and I think, well, bully for you. I'm sure they learned a lot for that shop. Right?
You're going to be in hold.
You're going to get there's going to be a huge furore about that because loads of people, I just don't agree with that. You take something. I don't mean you're taking small amounts, or you make them pay something, so they pay. They pay
short or whatever.
Whatever. Pay something. Anyway. That's.
Well, I'm happy.
People can do what they want in their own house. Let me just be clear about that. You don't have to write to me about it.
Aye, but back to dig money.
It felt unfair, did it?
Well,
because she wasn't paying it.
My sister wasn't paying it for that.
That does seem a bit.
But
did she do any household chores?
Did she fuck? She did fuck all. It was just a complete and utter farce. And
your parents just love her more than they love you.
It probably is a bit of that.
That's probably what it is.
So,
okay.
Anyway, we'll skip over that. We'll get past the dig money stuff. So
there's lots of reasons why working class people don't. And I had a PhD student recently who's finished and she's now working. She's an academic now. But she did that thing that I talked about right at the very beginning, that we know what the numbers are telling us, but we don't know why. So we don't know why they don't go to university. Look, you've got no good tuition fees, and you can get a grant, or you can get no grant, you can get a loan, and you can do this, that, and the other. She went and asked people, so she did it. Unfortunately, she got hurt right with COVID just when she started, but so she asked young people who were coming to the end of their school career lots of questions about what they were planning to do, what information they were basing their decisions on, how they ranked different types of information. So surprise, surprise, lots of young people are very, very much influenced by knowing somebody to whom something happened, as opposed to an adult saying, well, in actual fact, on average, this will be the case. So they're very bad at sort of accepting that, there's a bigger sample out there to look at rather than just the people they know. So they value the sort of stuff that the people they know, older brothers or sisters or whatever. But having said all of that, so some of them changed their mind as they moved through, because she interviewed them at different times as they were moving towards the end of their school career. And some of them chose to go, some of them weren't going to go into higher education and did. Some of them had been thinking about going and didn't. Some of them decided to take an intermediate thing where they were going to work for a year and then go, or they were going to go FE college and do some stuff there, and then maybe think about progressing to higher education. So that was quite small scale as these qualitative studies are. That's the problem. You're really talking about very small numbers, but I suppose it gave some insight, and quite useful insight, into the thinking. we think, well, if I tell you X, you will know X and you will act on X, but of course you won't necessarily. You'll just think, oh, she's just saying X, or I don't believe X because my pal Jimmy said X isn't true, and so it is really useful, because if you want to convince young people that they should be doing that and that they will be better off if they do it, which of course on average they will. If you have a degree, you will on average be better off still, even though you might not be just as well off as your middle class peer. Then we need to kind of work out how we convey that information. But I think there's a broader question as well, which is, we need to think about what are the skills we need and what are the things that we need moving forward in the economy. And I don't mean by that we allow private interests to say, well, we only need, we don't need people with a sociology degree. We just really need people who are plumbers, something like that. And that's not to downgrade either of those two things. It's to say, if you allow private interests to do that, companies saying, oh, these are the skills we need, this is what we need now. Private industry is notoriously short-sighted. So they just think about what I need this year, next year, within the next 5 years, this is what I need. They don't really care very much about what happens after that. So I wouldn't want them to be the people who decide that, but I do think there has to be a sort of a democratic understanding of what's needed. So lots of middle class young people come to university because that's just what they were expected to do. That's what their parents expected. That's what the school expected. Sometimes they're miserable the whole time and it's just a struggle to get through and they just really don't like it. And they do it. Lots of very clever young working class people never get the opportunity to set foot inside a university or set foot inside one of the more prestigious universities and do the more prestigious degrees. And that's a huge loss to society because their talents have gone. So they've not been used as best as they could for the benefit of society. So we need to have a better understanding. It can't just be, right, we need to get more and more and more and more people into HE, and we need to really forget about FE, and we need to just send working class people to FE, or we need to do that. So we need to have a really proper discussion of that, and there is a discussion going on.
FE, is that further education, like college and stuff like that?
Yeah. So sub degree sort of HNCs or whatever it might be. But when you look at, again, this is no rocket science. You look at sort of, France, Germany, they have very prestigious technical institutes. That kind of thing is very high status and very well regarded. Whereas here, if you've got a tool in your hand somehow, that's... you're lower than everybody else, and I think that's really, really problematic. The only place I can think we're anywhere sort of near thinking about it is when you look at the RollsRoyce engineering apprenticeship scheme, and their graduates are better than, they're more labour market ready than most university graduate engineers. And so there's lots of stuff about, the idea of graduate apprenticeships. And so different routes, thinking about different ways. But my concern when politicians start to talk about different ways is they really just want to say, send on the middle class. So it's not their ways they're talking about. No, everybody has to go to university. My ways will be going to university. So it's not their ways they're talking about. It's somebody else's ways that's not to go. Whereas I don't think that's the base on which, either for the young person themselves or for the economy, that's not the way we should be thinking about it. So, let's get them all to go to, less prestigious institutions, or going to FE. And so there needs to be a discussion, but it needs to be a better discussion than we're having.
Let's be honest, we live in a kind of snobbish society, I would describe it. I think it's
class-ridden, I think, is what you would describe it as.
Aye, well, class society in Scotland, I think it's still very much a thing. We kind of sort of touched on it earlier with the sort of differences between people with working class backgrounds and middle class backgrounds with sort of wages and stuff like that. And it's the same with higher education, I think. But one thing that I was going to say about it, and I'm prepared for you to maybe be upset with this, but I'll say it anyway, is I think maybe as working class people as a community, I think we could do better at trying to persuade people for our community to go to university as well, because I think that was a thing when I was younger. Nobody in when nobody else in your families went, there's a nervousness because it's alien. It's something that middle class people do. There's that fear. Even my own parents, to be fair, weren't hugely supportive of my decision to go there. So I think as a community, based on my own personal experience, we could do better at sort of persuading people this is not your only route to go in life. But if you're interested in a subject in academia, then go and pursue it, and you never know what might happen. I think we could do better at that, and I don't know if there's enough networks out there like going into our communities talking about this kind of stuff to try and persuade Waynes, or if they are, I don't know if they're doing as good a job as they could be, because we shouldn't be relying on the politicians that you're talking about there for the reasons that you're outlining.
I think what you're saying is true, and that PhD student I was talking about did talk about people whose parents weren't that keen on the idea of them going and ending up no working, no earning for 4 years and whatever. I think it's much less true. I mean, it was probably pretty routine, certainly when I went. It was, I was the fourth out of five and the first one to go to university, and then my sister came after me. So that would have been more the norm, that people didn't, or they were, you're always fearful of the unknown, so that's one of the things. Or if you did go, you went to teacher training college because that's a job you knew about, that was a good job, and if you were clever, you could be a teacher, and that's about the limits of your aspirations. Know that being a teacher is not a very good thing to be, although very good teachers are really, really important. There's lots of no very good ones, but anyway. So I think that was true. I think it's less true now. I think while we don't in any way we haven't closed that gap between middle class people and working class people, certainly it's not as bad as it was. And I think lots of people who didn't go to university themselves are quite keen and supportive of their children going to university. So I don't think it's as, I think back in the day going to university was quite a niche thing. People didn't do that. I can remember I used to get the train for Easterhouse Station in the morning into High Street to go to Strathclyde, and I just used to get the train about the same time as this group of women, and they seemed like old women to me. They were probably about 20 years younger than I am now, but they seemed like women in their 40s probably, and they were all going to their work. And at one point they asked me what I was doing, and you're a student, and what you studying and everything like that. So that was fine. And then this one day, this woman starts talking to me about like a cake she was baking, and what did I think about what had went wrong with this cake and something like that. I can't even remember the detail, but I know she was trying to get some information, being asking my advice about something, and I'm going, right, I don't know, I'll ask my ma, because my mum made very good cakes, and I said, right, well, okay, I'll ask my ma, I don't really know. And she says, is that not what you studying? She thought I was studying home economics. So she thought that's what it was. Anyway, so I don't think that's as true. I don't think it's as true now as it once was, probably even when you were there. But I think we might be in danger of going back to that when, in the current circumstances where people just might value getting a job, any job, and holding on to it now. But the whole structure of the labour market has changed. But it is as true now as it has ever been that on average you will do better financially with a degree than without a degree. Of all the people who have degrees, not the people who don't have degrees, the people with degrees will on average do better. Please don't write to me and tell me your brother left school at 14 and is now a millionaire, because that can happen as well. I'm talking about on average.
No, I know what you're saying.
My brother was probably earned more than me, and he did leave school at 15 and was an apprentice. So I know that can happen, but on average that's not what will happen.
And what I would say as well, I know you're an economist, but it's not all about money as well. I think that even I'd said to you, like when I first came up to uni, I'd bought a book, Irish by John Burroughs, I think it was, which was nothing to do with the subject I was studying. It's just something I stumbled upon. So just be things like that, just broaden your horizons and open you up to different sort of ways of thinking. And
John Burroughs, is he the guy who wrote... what was his other...
Benny Lynch. He
wrote
a book about Benny Lynch.
Yes, he wrote a book about Benny Lynch, that's the one. I can actually see his name on the cover of that book.
You've obviously been in the news recently, is how I would describe it, Jeanette. We've talked a lot about your sort of interests for sort of work and things like that, but maybe we could talk about some of your interests away from work. I first seen you because you got involved with Fans Against Criminalisation. I just stumbled upon you in George Square one day when you were ranting and raving.
You stumbled upon me. Surely I was hanging off a monument at the time.
Well, I didn't follow you. I wasn't drunk. I just, I wasn't actually meant to be there. I'll tell you, I was actually walking through the town, and I seen it was a big crowd of Hibs casuals, and I knew that one of my pals was gone, and I was kind of worried for him, and I phoned him and I said, I've just seen a big crowd of, I know they're no for Celtic anyway, so you should be careful. And he was kind of like, I'll be fine, I think you're being paranoid and that. And I was like, no, I'm telling you, there's something going on here. So anyway, I walked up anyway just to see what was going on. And sure enough, there was a wee kind of scuffle. But I think they were actually just there because they were interested in the content of sort of what was going on. So maybe we could talk briefly about that and then just see where we go from there. So how did you get involved in that, Jeanette? Had you been involved with sort of, I don't know if it's called civic campaigning or civil campaigning before, when the Scottish Government effectively introduced a bill which criminalised football fans. So it was specifically legislation, I think, after the Celtic Hearts game where they were saying there's a problem with football fans in this country and we're just going to tar them all with the sort of same brush and we're going to kettle them and police them differently than we would for any sort of other industry. So how did you get involved with campaigning with that? And
because I was in the Celtic Trust, and the Celtic Trust together with the other sort of main Celtic sports organisations met. We obviously had concerns about this, and when they were initially talking about introducing it, so we met with the other Celtic sports organisations, which we were used to doing, and we all know each other, and there's a lot of cross membership. So I helped to run an association bus, so I'm a member of the association, and there's people for the Green Brigade, and there was people for the I don't think that first meeting the Irish Association were there, but they became involved in it and the affiliation and so on. And we decided to campaign about it, so that was that. And I think, as is always the case when it comes to creative things, it was probably somebody for the Green Brigade who came up with the name Fans Against Criminalisation, because they're always the creative sort of people. So that was the name that we came. But we were always really clear about that. What's interesting about that is we knew, or we believed, that this legislation was intended to criminalise expressions of Irish identity at football, because in the past, the state was quite clear and the police were clear and the courts were clear that there were certain things which Rangers fans sang and did which were racist and criminal. But given this kind of two sides narrative that the press and the politicians and the media have pushed for generations, they were finding it really difficult because we don't sing things which were by their very nature criminal or racist or anything like that. So they needed to say it was to do with, it had to be offensive, and offensive just as a nebulous term, it can be applied to anything. So we were very clear that it was aimed...
Sorry, big word there, nebulous. You mean like subjective, effectively? What one
person thinks is offensive, another person doesn't think is offensive. So let's not get into examples of that because there's just too many. But anyway, so we were really clear that that's what that was about, but we were also really clear... And there was a whole lead up to that, and I don't want to go back through that again, but anyway, because it's quite a long time since I spoke about this. But
we can summarise it. And was there other clubs involved as well? Was there other groups?
No. At the beginning, it was us. So just to finish what I was saying, we were clear that this was aimed at us, but we were also very clear that if the police were given powers, they would use them against everybody. Because there's no police force in the world, when it's given the chance to have powers, doesn't use them, and indeed often abuse them. So we knew fans of other clubs were going to be vulnerable to this. And we also knew that we'd have a much better chance of building a successful campaign. And initially that was to stop the legislation being introduced and then ultimately to get it repealed. that we'd have a much better campaign and if we could get fancy other clubs involved. Now, initially, their attitude was, it's just about us and, the Sinister Sisters or whatever it is they call us or whatever. Anyway, so, and then there was a kind of madness within the Rangers support, which was like, yous wanted this. And you're like, no, we're the only people who are fighting this, get a grip. But ultimately, we were able to, we didn't sit in a room and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but we were able to kind of through some just contacts to say, right, okay, you're doing an event, you're doing a protest on this day, we'll do a protest, So we did eventually, so some people from Motherwell, from Hamilton, we worked with people from Partick Thistle, St Johnstone, St Mirren, and some people for Rangers, although only one woman joined us for a period and was very helpful. But really, it was just a matter of saying, right, let's just have a point of contact to say, right, this is how we're going to do this, and we're not going to be pals, but let's just get this done, and we did. And I think that was, I don't know. When you look back on it, you lived through it, but that's got to be one of the most successful working class self-organised campaigns ever. We had a piece of legislation, the only legislation ever enacted by the Scottish Parliament, repealed. We had, so that's it. Sorry, it's not the only thing that they enacted, but the only piece of legislation which they enacted that has ever been repealed is that. And we did that. And that was working class self-organisation that did that. And it's massive. When you look back, you have to look at it for a distance to realise how utterly incredible that was, and has meant that, lots of football fans since then don't have criminal convictions that would have had criminal convictions, haven't lost jobs, haven't lost relationships, haven't all of that. That now does not happen because we made that stand, and it was took us 6 years. But we'd nowhere else to go. We weren't going to stop going to the football, so I suppose we just had to keep going, and we did.
What did you learn through that time, Jeanette? This is probably quite a big question. I don't know if we have enough time to get into tonight, but you can tell me once I ask it. But did it change your perception about who has power in this country in terms of the legislators?
No, I think I knew that. Because, they got that through, the SNP got that legislation through with their 7-vote majority. And the only reason that we were in a position, that didn't just happen without us, but the only reason we were in a position for James Kelly's repeal about to go through is because they lost that majority. And the power of the other parties now, it's hard to say. So the Greens supported us. I think that was probably a bit debated inside the Green Party, and I think they wanted to have a go at the SNP. The Tories certainly wanted to have a go at the SNP, but nevertheless, I can remember their leader, it was McCletchy, his name was, he died during that time. Anyway, he gave a very good speech in Parliament about why this was just a really terrible thing to do. He was a lawyer and he was talking about this is just really poorly. So we were able to convince enough people who weren't necessarily the natural friends or allies of working class football supporters, but to realise that this was really poor legislation, wasn't going to work, it was going to cause the police all sorts of bother, because they couldn't really enforce it, and it was just going to be a real hassle. So either because they wanted to have a kick at the SNP, or because they genuinely believed it was just really bad legislation, we were able to convince enough people. So, and we did. We went and spoke to them all. We had to go and have meetings with Tories, and we had to go and have meetings with people who weren't our natural allies, or people who particularly liked us or whatever, but we had to find a way that convinced them. So no, I'm very clear about what power was, and I'm also very clear because in my youth I was a member of a Trotskyist organisation, and I think I'm still a Trotskyist by training and inclination, in the sense that I believe in the power of the United Front. I'm happy to work with people who I completely fundamentally disagree with on some things, as long as we've got a joint, single issue thing that we want to go with, and I will do what needs to be done to try and bring people together to ensure that happens. And that campaign could not have worked without that sort of approach, that we needed to have as much unity in that campaign as we could. And these are very basic, principles that, left-wing, the idea is solidarity, and, that you need to have unity. If you don't have unity, then you're fucked, basically. So
yeah, that probably brings us on to the here and now then, Jeanette, as well then. So there was a protest arranged, was it last month? Was it September?
7th, yeah.
September the 7th, by the sort of right wing in this country, and the left wing and the trade union movement came out with a counter protest in support of people who want to come here and live, and say we're open to immigration and we're not going to stand for any sort of right wing nonsense. You gave an impassioned speech at that protest, and then subsequent to that, organisations like the Orange Order and the sort of loyalists of this country have orchestrated a campaign effectively against you by writing to your work, your employer, and I think contacting other trade unions to try and speak out against you. So it must be quite tough, this personally. I'm just interested to see like how all that's been going and what you want to talk about it, basically.
Look, there's nothing new. Do you know what I mean? I've been subjected to that for 3 decades in this city. It's really nothing new for me. What is quite interesting about this particular thing? So what I did was I pointed to the people on the other side of the square and I identified them. I said who they were, and part of that was because I get a bit tired of people on the left and the trade union movement saying, we're going to fight the right wing. We're not going to allow the right wing to march in our streets. And, as I've pointed out in other places, well, they do. They march, most weeks of the year. So don't say you're not going to let them march in the street, because they are. So the people who are both the ideological basis and the organisational structural forum of anti-immigration, Islamophobic, right-wing ideology are the loyal orders and groups around Rangers Football Club. That's who they are. It's no surprise to anybody that, when the right wants to organise and, they go and leaflet outside Ibrox, or, that's who it was. Those people on the other side of the square that day were members of the Apprentice Boys of Derry, members of the Orange Order, including, I think we've all come to know him as Nazi Flag Boy, the guy who was done for having a Nazi flag at Ibrox. That's who those people were. And in their discussions beforehand, and I've seen, their sort of social media, they basically organised it on that day because there wasn't a parade that day, or as they call it, a procession. So that's who they are. And I've just got no time now for people who want to turn their head away from that. That's who they are, and I said it. Now, interestingly, none of those people have come back and said, that wasn't us. We weren't doing that. We're no right wing. They just said, she's anti-Protestant. And you think, okay, this is a bit tiresome. Get a grip. Where are you getting that for? So they do what they have done on numerous occasions before. I mean, I don't know if my work keeps a collection of them, or they just burn them as they come in, or what they do with them. But they write, because they do. That's another thing these people do, which is just horrific. They target people. They target people in our community, by which I mean the multi-generational Irish community in Scotland. And they just identify them at your social media, and if they've got jobs like teachers or, nurses or whatever, they get people sacked. They just write to their, some wee guy down in Kent sits and organises this and coordinates and gets people to write. So they got people to write. The Orange Order and the Apprentice Boys of Derry. I think it was called the Scottish Amalgamated Committee. Sounds like an old-fashioned trade union term, but anyway, that's who they are. Put out a statement saying, people, this terrible woman, and you should write to her work. And you're like, all right. Yawn. And so that was fine. So none of that is new. None of the names they call me, none of the abuse they give me, none of the stuff they say. It's no new. And quite frankly, it's water off a duck's back to me. It's not very nice for my family, and people don't like that, and I tend not to see it, to be honest. They're really howling into the abyss, really, because I don't tend to see it, and it doesn't usually bother me. But none of that is new. what was new, what's interesting, is that the Scottish Secretary of the GMB, so the most senior official, the most senior official, no the elected officers, but the most senior official of the GMB in Scotland, actually responded to complaints that she'd got for her members, allegedly, saying, oh, this woman said these things and we don't like it and whatever. And instead of saying, well, yeah, okay, but she's actually not a member of the GMB and so it's absolutely nothing to do with us, she decided to write it to these people in the most intemperate and outrageous terms, like a really badly written email, to be honest. It was a pure ruddy, even have put your name to it. But so she wrote this thing and she sent it to people. And of course that found its way into the public domain because people screenshotted it and put it up on their social media. And then the press picked it up. Well, I say the press, I mean the Sun and the Daily Mail, but I don't know if that really counts as the press. But anyway, those people picked it up and tried to have a go with it. And that was a really outrageous thing to do for an officially one union to publicly, to say the things that she said about the most senior elected officer of another trade union, which is what I am. It's just, I think, unheard of in my experience. I've never known it to happen. And that's interesting that she felt she could do that. Worse than that is, there has been not one word from the organised trade union movement to come out and say that that shouldn't have happened. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, don't get me wrong, lots of people have been in touch with me and said, oh, actually terrible, and they're bastards, and, blah, 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 blah. Nothing in public. Nothing in public. That just wouldn't happen to a member of another community. It just wouldn't happen. So I don't know if we've just reached a point in time where they actually have to stop. They have to come to deal with they've got to come to terms and deal with their complete denial that they're in about the forces of reaction in this country and the extent to which that's organised around the loyal orders and, Protestant supremacy. Okay, just for anybody that's listening, I said Protestant supremacy. It's no Protestants I've got a problem with. So, that sort of thing. So, I wonder whether they are going to come to terms with it, because I see no evidence there. I see no evidence that, any trade union is putting their hands up and saying, no, this is not right, we can't have this. STUC included. And lots of these people are my friends. People, comrades, friends that I've worked with. I've seen nothing. So I think that tells you something about, it's the last unspoken thing that remains unspoken, that they're just not going to say it. Don't know why.
So what would you like to see? Like, I'm guessing just unity, like from the other trade unions, just them to come out and say, not necessarily for this one to lose their job, presumably, but, that was an error of judgment.
Should be condemned. Look, I don't know that at this stage you would want somebody to put out a public statement or something, but within the structures of the movement, it should have been made very clear that this was unacceptable, just completely unacceptable. My own branch in my union have supported me and said publicly that this shouldn't have happened. And, our union at Scotland level has talked to their union, so our people have talked to their people. So there's been a little bit, but not much. And what I would like to see, actually more importantly than any of this, than, she said, and blah, 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 and this is really terrible, because at the end of the day, as I say, it's not really a big deal for me. What is more important is that we actually start saying, yeah, when we're talking about the right wing in Scotland, we need to name who they are. When the Apprentice Boys of Derry decide that they're going to march on the 10th of November, the 10th of next month, past St Alphonsus Church on the way out and past St Mary's on the way back, that the trade union movement say, no, we're going to turn out a number because this is not acceptable and we wouldn't have it for any other community. You don't You don't march past synagogues, you don't march past mosques, you don't march past anywhere else. You shouldn't be marching past Catholic churches. It doesn't really matter whether you have a religious belief or any religious belief or none. That's just unacceptable. And they should be coming out and saying that. So if they started to do that, that'd be fine. They don't ever have to, they don't ever have to send me a wee letter or, do whatever. I'm not really caring about that. What they need to be doing is starting to say, actually, this is a trade union issue. This is a trade union issue and we need to be taking it up and we need to stop avoiding it just because, we have pockets of orangeism inside the trade union movement, which we do, and pockets of orangeism inside the Labour Party, which we do, and pockets of orangeism inside other, political parties, which we do. So instead of just, we need to start addressing that. Just name it.
I think I'm not as much a trade unionist as yourself, Jeanette, and I don't know if I'm talking out of turn here, but it's a Labour issue for me as well, like in terms of you've stood there in your personal capacity as a human.
No, in my capacity as president of UCU Scotland.
Right, well, you're there representing your trade union,
Yes.
and then that sits separately for your work as a lecturer at Glasgow University, and then these people are orchestrating a campaign to contact your employer.
Yeah.
So if I was a member of a trade union, I'd be going, this is a Labour issue.
Of course it is.
Like they're trying to cancel somebody for exercising the right to have free speech.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that the solidarity should be there
It's
with
a
that.
fundamental trade union. It's an attack on my employment. That's what they were attempting to do. Unsuccessfully, but that's what they were attempting to do. And sadly, for other people, it has been successful. People have been sacked. There's a number of people that I know about, and the problem is it's very difficult to raise these issues when they happen because the person usually wants to just move on to their next job and no become the spotlight, because then that might cause them problems getting other jobs. So that's the difficulty. I know personally of a number of people who've been attacked in terms of employment, quite a few of whom have lost their jobs. But I can't speak about that. Only that person can speak about that. Now, I happen to be in a situation where I'm able to say, come ahead, you know what I mean, if you want, because, you've been trying to do it for about 30 years now and it really hasn't happened now. And see, to be quite honest, see at my stage in the game, what do I care, really? When you write your wee badly worded letters to, saying, oh, she's this, that and the other, aye, and what?
Well, I don't think we can end it any better than that, Jeanette. So I really appreciate you coming in today, and you never know, we'll maybe see you in here again, Jeanette, at some point.
Right, good to talk to you.
Thank you. Cheers.